So we know that this is a topic that is resonant with the entire country. I'm glad that we have been able to bring this to you. So without any further ado, please allow me to formally welcome our esteemed faculty today, Professor Dr. Jack McCready. Very good evening, sir, from India, and thank you for making the time to host this masterclass. To all our
My pleasure.
To all our attendees, thank you for making the time, and I'm sure it will be worth it as you go through the next 1 hour with Professor McCready. I will briefly introduce him, though his list of accomplishments and studies do not fit in the time that we have, but I encourage you to look up his work and his profile after this masterclass as well. May I remind you that this masterclass has been brought to you by the University of San Diego in collaboration with GradRight. And the University of San Diego has two very interesting programs for their masters in cybersecurity engineering as well as cybersecurity operations and leadership. Both these are available online as well as offline. Our team will be in touch with you to share more details about these programs after this webinar. But let me introduce Professor McCready now. So Professor McCready has over 40 years of experience in research, development, test, and evaluation arena. He spent more than 25 years at the Coast Guard's R&D Center, where he served as the division director responsible for all research related to C4ISR, command control communications, computers, and intelligence surveillance and reconnaissance, as well as the Director for Strategic Analysis and Development. He is an expert in maritime stewardship and maritime safety and security, and was a founding member of both DHS's Science and Technology Directorate and CG's Specialized Forces. He supports the US Navy on signal analysis and has consulted with the Coast Guard's Office of Requirements on Cyber and C-51 infrastructure in support of maritime surveillance, detection, classification, identification, and prosecution. His technical experience encompasses all maritime modes and mediums, including communications, sensing technologies, IT, cyber, risk analysis, counter-narcotics, counter-terrorism, non-lethal weaponry, and CBRNE technology. I must share most of them. I don't know, but hope to learn from Sir someday. He has specific expertise in research addressing the problems affecting the maritime transportation system, MTS, and practical experience in delivering new capabilities that resolve operational gaps. Since transitioning to the private sector, Professor McCready has applied his experience in strategic and requirements analysis to provide solutions in cybersecurity, risk analysis, sensors, and intelligence sectors. He supports organizations seeking cyber compliance on HIPAA, PCI, CMMC as a virtual chief information security officer. He is a professor of instruction in advanced cybersecurity, operations management, and leadership, including a guest lecture at Queen's College, Oxford, in the UK, as well as an adjunct faculty, as you all know, at the University of San Diego at their online program administered by the Shiley Marcos School of Engineering. He has been published and cited in multiple peer-reviewed journals and professional magazines, and has been awarded 2 US patents on structure-borne vibration abatement for US submarines. Apart from all of these, he has a PhD in application of natural language processing to enhance risk management decisions, and an MS in operations research, as well as a BS in electrical engineering. I'm sure that still does not cover all his accomplishments, but it shall do for this session. So we would request Professor McCready to start the class. Just to go over the structure very briefly, he would be teaching for around 50 minutes. All the students are welcome to post their questions about the class strictly in the Q&R section, and we will be addressing them towards the last 10 minutes of the class. Over to you, sir.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. You've left me blushing. I'll leave it at that. So let me get right to it because there is a lot to this topic area. And capitalizing on one of the points initially is that the University of San Diego, in their cyber program, they have two tracks. One is based upon cyber more towards the engineering side with coding and things of this nature. The other is, of course, the CSOL, the Cybersecurity Operations and Leadership. Basically, the difference is that when you're in the engineering role, you're looking to do more hands-on technical work in detection work, research, looking for vulnerabilities and things of this nature. And the CSOL side, you're looking more towards being in the operations leadership as either as a manager or perhaps as the liaison, which is quite a critical position. And I'll mention that in a moment. But for now, let me get into this. And it's cybersecurity, the journey to compliance, which is the big thing. So next slide. Okay, we want to build a foundation, okay? This is a class-oriented type of a program. So we want to look at the rules, regulations, but we're going to focus strictly on the U.S. Department of Defense CMMC program and its impact on the business. We want to prepare you for analyzing interdisciplinary questions that would go towards these certification challenges. Next. So what we're going to look at, history, foundation, the multifaceted roles. Next. Leadership, discovery, recovery, continuity management, cyber economics, procurement and acquisition concerns. Next. And ultimately, it's making good decisions in the cyber age. All right. Next. Risk framework, compliance regimens. Okay. We're going to start off with a very, very brief history of cyber. And for that point, what is cyber? What's the purpose? Okay. The certification journey. This is where we're going to spend most of our time so you can understand what's going on with it. And I'm going to cut right to the end of this program. This is all about, to be certified, you have to, tell somebody what you're going to do. You have to show that you're doing what you said you were going to do, and you have to have enough evidence to prove that you've taken and you have the artifacts to say, I've done what I said I would do. Okay. We're going to go through this, and you start off with the 2B, the as is to 2B. This is where we start to make sure your journey is appropriate. And we'll get into the assessments, the expectations, and ultimately come up with the conclusions. Okay. Next. Okay. So the brief history. Okay. Everybody knows cyber has taken on such a huge amount of time, effort throughout all of the social media, as well as engineering and business. But cyber has been around for a long time. That's the whole point of this. 1971 was the very first creeper program that was, in essence, a worm. So cyber goes back 50 years. We didn't seem to pay that much attention, but as the use of the internet and information technology and our dependency grew, all of a sudden the issues in cyber really started to take off. Next. This is a brief idea, not idea, but the timeline. And you can start, this one went from 1981 to 2005, and you can see the expansion. Well, since 2005, this curve has grown actually exponentially in the amount of malware timeline, the amount of malware that's out there, the number of cyber type of attacks, and everything is phenomenal. And it just keeps on growing, as I say, exponentially. But everybody goes, well, this is the PC side of the house. And there was a time when Apple and iOS were touting, and I know people who said, but I've got an iOS. I'm secure, no problem. Well, to a hacker, that's a challenge. Next. And as a result, yes, iOS infection timeline. And this only goes up to 2014. And if you were to look through, and you can read some of these major attacks, they just show that nothing is safe. Every PC, every type of internet utilization has vulnerabilities, and the hackers are very, very smart in taking advantage of these. Okay, next. So again, I've shown you that's the history. It's been around for a while. It's burgeoning into unbelievable numbers of attacks across different sectors, creating different types of problems and issues. One of the more notable ones in the recent years was an attack on the shipping line Costco. The result was $300 million in ransomware, okay, that they had to pay. So this is becoming very important on the impact of business. How do I protect myself? And so what is compliance? How do I get certified? How do I implement it? Next. So here's our objective today, okay? We're going to go over what is improving the cybersecurity posture, okay, against these incursions. Our objective, we want to understand appropriate governance structures by implementing plans, programs that enhance capabilities, okay? There are three issues that we're going to want to address for you today. How do you improve that posture? And it has to be based upon a very cogent program. And it has to include continuous monitoring, evaluations, assessments. I mean, these are the things that are very intuitively known to people. And to use a word for it, our second one is implementing security protections. And the third is ensuring that the organizational personnel across your entire organization are trained in cybersecurity commensurate with responsibility. So what briefly does this mean? We'll use the often used example of phishing attacks. And we want your people to be trained, do not click on anything. We go back years and years to the old Nigerian prince who has the $1 million, the $10 million, just click and help me, okay? Well, those types of attacks are still around today. And yet you'd think with all of the obvious notification of these types of attacks, they wouldn't occur. But because of the sophistication, the hackers are still getting people to click. Or they still have people who have authorized to download things when they shouldn't be downloading. So this is what I mean by we're going to have this objective. And to use a single short phrase, we want everyone to understand and to have a culture that's oriented around cybersecurity, cyber-based security operations. Next. Okay, we got to have some definitions. Okay, so initially, the Department of Commerce. Information security is the protection of information. The biggest one is according to the U.S. House Rule 4246, fine. And you can read it, I'll just summarize it. Basically, anything that does computing, that does any kind of information technology, transmission of information, international compromise, etc., is a threat to the public health and safety of the United States, violates the Health Act. And when you're looking to be certified for a corporation, and again, we're going to talk primarily about this new CMMC, this becomes significant in that you're protecting both your corporate information as well as anything related to the U.S. Department of Defense. Next. Okay, here's the biggie. What is controlled unclassified information? Very long definition. Unclassified information, it requires safeguarding and dissemination controls. We'll use a simple terminology, something that you don't want people to know on in public, all right? It could be your intellectual property, okay? It could be a specific path or methodology of approaching something. It could be an algorithm, okay? But it's something that requires safeguarding or dissemination controls based upon various laws. So the CUI is going to be one of the major points in any of these certifications. And how do we go about understanding what CUI is? How do we integrate it into our programs and march towards to meet the necessary standard so that we can have and achieve certification for a DoD program? Next. Pardon me. Now, this is a U.S. government program. And in the United States, where would we be without acronyms? It's very critical. So here are some of the more critical ones that you'll be seeing or get used to seeing. All of them are here. I won't read them for you. However, it's not uncommon to have a sentence as the following. I'm very interested in getting a CMMC, but I'm not sure what CUI might be, and I ain't going to be the OSC that has to eventually become with a C3PO. And I understand that NIST and FIPS and ESP become important because I'm not sure if I have an MSP or if an MSSP. Did I say any actual English words in that sentence? However, it's a very accurate sentence covering I need to understand the scope of what it's going to take to go through and become certified. Okay? So just keep that type of thing in mind. If it has an acronym, then in the U.S. government, it's real. Okay, next slide, please. All right, here we go. What is going to be the journey to reaching CMMC compliance? Next. Okay, try to keep this simple. Where are we now? Go back one. You're a little ahead of myself. Okay, where are we now? And then how do we get there to where we want to be? I mean, we want to keep this as simple as possible because eventually getting into the compliance details will become very convoluted, very complicated, and it incorporates a number of different standards, methodologies, and approaches. Okay, now next. So we want to understand as the foundation, where are you now? What level of protections do you have in place? What documentation do you have? Remember, I used the word establishing a culture of cyber-based security. Now, if you're an IT type of an organization, this stuff becomes fairly intuitive. But what if you're not an IT organization, or you are the Cybersecurity Information Officer for a mechanical manufacturing widget type of a company? You may have some of the most creative and capable people in the world who can create, small, pins or find refinements down to like 1/10 of 1,000th for, mechanical objects. But they don't understand, what do you mean by cyber? Why do I have to worry about these things? So understanding where you are now and then the organization will help to detect where you're going to go next. So we're going to start with, what is the scope of compliance? Okay. And we refer to the core standard, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, SP 800-171. One way to look at it is NIST 171, just to use a short version, has under their cybersecurity framework these 5 recognized categories: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And then they break them into the 22 subcategories. And again, you can see on this category description what each of them are, such as asset management. But you notice right away, business environment, because we want to make sure we're always balancing what am I doing to protect cyber-wise, but how much would it affect the operation of the business? Simplistically, you'll hear me say it again and again, if I put in place too many restrictive cyber requirements, it will impact the business's ability to develop revenue. That's the last thing that you want to do. You put them out of business. So there's going to be a constant balance, and that's why the business environment, the next one, governance, is in place there to understand what is it that I need to do. Then the others, how do I protect? How do I detect? How do I respond and recover? As I'd mentioned before, under the cyber engineering program, you might spend a lot of your time understanding new methodologies of detection, protection, responding, isolation, and things of this nature. But the CSOL, we want you to understand it's still a technically oriented program, but you're now going to be in a position to try and really position yourself where you're addressing the balance between cyber protection and business operations. Next. So, all right, I have to be compliant. Well, what does compliance mean? How do I measure it? Because now we're going to get into some more towards the technical side of it without getting too involved in detailed mathematics or anything. We have a targeting system, 5 levels, initial level all the way through. We're targeting level 4, a managed level of program. And you can see the definitions, and I'm actually going to take a moment and read these. Policies and standards exist with formal management approval. I've now brought the business side of the house in. There are exceptions are documented, proved, and occur in less than 3% of the time, whatever the timeline might be. And what it is, the expectation, formal processes exist and are documented. Evidence can be provided for all activities. Detailed metrics can be provided to capture them. Minimal targets for the metrics have been established. Less than 5% of process exceptions occur. So now, as engineering and technical nerdy type people, and I am one, I now have something that's fallen into my area. I have something that I can measure. I've defined what it will be. I've given exceptions. I've given timelines. So now I have a way of establishing, first of all, where am I against this table? And we're shooting for a level 4 managed. If you can achieve level 5, excellent. But we're looking for level 4 managed. Next. So how do I go about doing it? Well, one of the ways we would do this is to go against all those cybersecurity frameworks, okay? And you might use a GRC platform. A GRC platform is a governance, risk, and compliance platform. This is just an example of one that's commercially out there. And it goes through each and every one of the elements identified under the CSF to help you establish. And this one just as the example. Under ID, one of the 5 areas, the first one, asset management, -1. Are physical devices and systems within the organized, are they all inventoried? And in this particular example, they gave us an initial level, and they're only at the initial level, meaning a 1. So therefore, they have a lot to do. You would go through each and every one of the elements and assess where you are as an as-is with the understanding of the to-be, okay? And the response mechanism, you must have an accessible file that must tie to a periodic review and update. So now I've gone back into the measurements and targets and how I would go about evaluating. And that way I can determine I'm at the initial level. Next. Put them all together. This is only page 1 of multiple pages that go through every one of the 22 subcategories that you would find in the CSF. And you can see on the far right side, what they've done is we've established, and you would work with your IT department to determine each and every one of them. And just to take a second, starting from the upper left, under ID, asset management, physical devices, the system within the organization, are they inventoried? Well, now they said their as-is condition is 3. They need to be at a level 4. And you could go all the way down through each and every one of the 22 subcategories through ID, protect, detect, respond, recover, and address each and every one of these in this manner to establish your as-is condition. Next. So you have a whole lot of information. And where do you get all this information? Okay, here's where the details would come from. And I put down the source for this. It combines the NIST, the CIS, COBIT, ISA, and ISO documents and standards. So ID, as I say, it's pretty much the same thing. You have off on the left-hand side a little bit more detail. And you can have whether or not your policies and your practice information maturity, where are they? Okay, one person says he's at a 4.3 out of 5, another says a 2. But again, this is an assessment done in conjunction with you as a possible consultant to this, with the IT department of the company or organization. Next. Ultimately, you will have a single entry for each and every one of the 22 categories. Okay, again, this is an example. Target score, where are your policy scores, where are your evidence scores? And I come back to the same thing I said initially. You're going to tell them what you're going to do. You're going to, show that you're doing what you said you're going to do, and you're going to provide evidence. So the telling part is the policies issues. The evidence is, am I really doing it? And just looking, when we summarize and take the average of each and every one of these across this example, the policy target scores of always 4. That's fine. That's easy to fill out. But the individual scoring themselves went anywhere from 2.83 to 3.71, some 3s and some 2s. And the evidence score is rather telling. So let's go to the next slide. Because people are very visual. When I've used this particular radar type plot example, okay, it's shown on the outer ring all the 22 and the overall scores. It gives the radius from 0 to 4, which is your target. And I've plotted each and every one of your existing. And that's in the blue. And those are based upon your policy, your documentation. Simplistically, when meaning, we got a lot of work to do in terms of policies. If I can't have a written policy as those original target metrics stated that is documented, then I can't move forward. Next. And when we look at the evidence, so fine, I have documentation. But if I don't have the artifacts, the evidence to back it up, then you can't necessarily say you have started and you're existing in a culture of cybersecurity for the organization. So in this particular example, on the first one, asset management, it says right there. Now, again, I bring this up because this is a visual representation. To put pages and pages of numbers can sometimes be misleading. Now, we can go through them, we can spend our time. But what you want to impress upon the organization is a quick representation, a visual representation of where you stand so that you have the ability to say, this is how I'm documented, and now I can give you a path forward. And this becomes one method of showing how much work needs to be done, where you might focus yourself in terms of getting things accomplished. Next. But what about risk? Okay, risk is a big deal here, you know. As that previous slide showed, our evidence is very low in certain areas. Now, okay, we can talk about asset management, we can talk about access control, we can talk about communication systems. Okay, we know that risk is, you know, a balance between the two of them, and you know we want to know what to do with risk, as it says over here. Okay, so what role does it play? Next. Now I bring this up. What are the options with risk? They were briefly discussed there. Next. Next. Again. Well, those look pretty good. I mean, yeah, I want to avoid, I want to reduce, I want to get rid of it. Next. Yeah, and that's the same in a little picture I said before. But there's another one that people don't seem to understand. Next. Yes, you can accept the risk. Next. But when you accept the risk, you face the consequences. So, oh, sure, you know, I've got all these vulnerabilities. I haven't done a patch or an update in weeks or months or whatever, you know, and so far I'm fine, you know, nothing's happened. Great, you accept the risk. There's an old saying out there now that it's not a matter of when you'll get hacked, it's if you'll get hacked, it's when you'll get hacked. And that's really becoming very truthful. You know, the severity of the hack differs. This is where the risk actually comes to play when you're doing the analysis as to what protections you should impose, such as, you know, one of the control families is on the use of mobile phones, mobile assets. They bring in a significant enhancement to business operations, but at the same time, they are also a significant risk of the ability for, including BYOD, bring your own device, of you putting something on your phone that isn't necessarily accepted or protected or strengthened against incursions, and all of a sudden it winds up being able to bleed into the organization. So these are really the four things, and don't forget acceptance of the consequences. Next. Again, we go through the same type of a deal with the 22 subcategories. We analyze them. We look at the risk area, whatever it might be. Then we just simply make an assessment table, you know, using the GAR, green, amber, and red type of a rating. Okay. Do we consider a asset management breach to be severe? Is it, you know, what's its likelihood and what's its risk factor? And who's responsible for this? Again, go back to those acronyms. MSP, the managed service provider. Managed service provider, simplistically, is the IT department, whether they are internal or an external to your organization. The business section, again, I put it goes across the entire team. It's not just an IT problem. It is an entire organization. So in the business environment, the risk, the likelihood, the severity, likelihood, and the impact, it's a senior management issue to address. And what I mean briefly by that is if you don't get senior management involved with the organization and the IT protection, again, culture. I told you I was going to use that word a lot. The culture for the organization, then you're opening yourself to a tremendous amount of potential vulnerabilities and potential consequences. And by not accepting some of these, you're facing those consequences. Okay, next. Another way of looking at it. We want to have something, again, that allows us to conduct some kind of analysis. And this is just a dashboard showing the risk management key performance indicators and where do we stand. And, you know, we use, again, the GAR approach. We're looking for impact, severity, and likelihood. And we use these indicators on the key performances. And you can see down in the bottom left, the risk by category. Is it an information technology concern? Is it a legal concern? You know, and all of these other things. And there's a short acronym that seems to apply easily to everyone. It's called PESTLE. PESTLE. These would be your key indicators. And PESTLE is short for political, environmental, social, technological, legal, or economic. And those will cover and cross over into both your IT concerns as well as the business concerns. And they're kind of listed there by in the risk by category. And then from those, you can create a risk map. So what will be the risk map? Next. Now, these types of things are common throughout the internet. You can go and search for a risk register matrix. They're commercial tools. They'll work. They have to be implemented and utilized. That's my only point to this type of a slide. You have your options. What are the severity options? What are the likelihoods? What are the impacts? You can increase the number of these if you want. And you put them against the severity versus the likelihood, and then you can determine if we have a fatal severity and it's highly likely, then its risk is high. So there's nothing really super rocket science about this stuff. A lot of it is very common sense. And if you see across the top, I have a risk matrix, I have the risk list, and I have a risk level report. And these are all available from different formats, different corporations. So you don't even have to create your own. So it's just a matter of, going out and finding what fits within your organization. Next. Again, as I've said before, one of the things is rather than having a multitude of different types of numerical charts and tables, especially when we talk thinking business, one picture worth 1,000 words. The report and posture provides the risk posture for the information system. This is easily seen and understandable, and it incorporates, it's built up from everything else that you've done. And this would be the type of thing that would be able to show to senior management where the risk happens to be. And again, this is just an example that was thrown together. It gives you some percentages information, identifies say at the bottom across the number of fatal conditions is 7, the number of major impacts, 9, etc. And you can then take this and build it back down, deconsult it, so that you can find out the specific areas on that previous slide, or using PESTLE as the example, and where do you have your issues? Next. Okay, so we've gone through. You've determined, you've done all of this pre-stuff, you're creating, I know where the heck I am. It gives me a snapshot of how much I have to do. So what do I have to do prior to getting into the assessments and the auditing stuff? Next. How do I get there? This becomes an area that, as I've said, it sounds so simple. What am I going to do? I document what I said I was going to do, and then I go and I get evidence. But it becomes complicated when we look at what the actual measures, metrics, the standards that would be used by the certifying agency. Next. And again, this is, as the title says, this is a typical journey to achieving the CMMC certification. This is not law. This is just some example of the 5 areas, the 5 steps in a logical progression that can be used to start moving forward. You would have to tailor each and every one of these steps to your individual organization. However, each and every one of these steps is part of building yourself ready for the actual assessment. So we start with determine your CUI scope and boundary. That's where we talked about the CSF. It'll tell you where you are with respect to certain areas. And then they have two sub-layers to it. Again, you can tailor those. The second step, you perform a self-assessment against NIST 171 and CMMC. Step 3, you prepare for the cyber incident reporting requirements. And we'll get into the reporting requirements in a moment. You complete your assessment, your documentation against the 171, 110 practices. And you'll see a little shocking device in a few moments on what the 110 means. Then finally, prepare for the assessment itself. So step 6 would actually conduct the assessment, and then step 7 might be the post-assessment issues. All right, so next. So what is the CUI? Okay, again, when we're talking the US CMMC certification, working with the US Department of Defense, the understanding where your confidential, unclassified information boundaries are is critical. So knowing those areas, those things that cannot be or should be regulated through either laws or protections, IP, and things of this nature. This is a very simplified diagram that'll show you a way of starting to look at it. So we'll take a second. So are you dealing with classified or unclassified information? No? Okay. And if you're dealing with classified, you stop. So I'm not dealing with classified, but does the information fall within law regulation? That's the short version of CUI. Okay. You're not dealing with it, you stop. If it is yes, you have to identify the categories that the information falls within. Where do you get it? From the DoD CUI registry. Thank goodness they gave you a registry. However, it's very long, very complicated. It actually uses inputs from the National Archives where they categorize it by sector and by capability. If it's still yes, you go down into the characterization, and then here your example. It's controlled by, again, more acronyms. The Office of the U.S. Department of Defense. It's class InfoSec. Its category is privacy. Limited dissemination controls is by federal control of federal contracts, and a certain POC. Because eventually, the only people who have the authority to make CUI decisions is from the Department of Defense. And if you don't have, or you have any questions, is something, CUI, it's incumbent upon you to go back through your prime or directly to your DoD contact and get a determination on what is CUI within your contract bounds. Next. So, simple example again. Is it open research? Okay, go straight into a controller, then fine, it's not CUI. But if it is controlled under any of those existing examples, personal protection, IP addressing, it's bound by law regulation for dissemination. I haven't talked much about this, but here's an example. Anything that falls under the ITAR, the International Trade in Arms Restrictions, those would be areas and things of this nature. Is it a controlled technology? Is it just something that, must be regulated due to patent controls? Any of those controlled types of research, and you can follow the red lines through it and see your boundaries. One of the things to understand is a simple way of thinking about the boundary is anything that can connect to the internet, more than likely, if you have CUI at all, anything that connects to the internet is likely, not necessarily, but likely inside the CUI boundary. That includes printers. Lately, printers have become very intelligent, and they've got their own internal hard drives, and they will connect directly to the internet so that you can just have something sent from your computer to the printer and then sent out. So therefore, it's within the boundary. Where something may not be in the boundary, when I think in terms of manufacturing, is if you have a lab, or rather a shop, a mechanical shop, manufacturing shop, and you're having a mechanical device manufactured. The numerical control machine, if it has just a code to stamp out something, the numerical code machine, the NC machine itself, is not in the boundary. However, if the code itself comes from, something from, say, DoD, and you're using it to your computer to then update the NC itself, now you've brought the machine into the mix. Paper products, people forget this all the time. If you print out a plan that has CUI information on it, that plan is within the boundary and must be controlled, either through numerical marking, this is plan 5 of 7, or whatever. And in a lot of cases, this is where people have found some errors. Those plans must be treated with controls, meaning at nighttime, they must be locked up. If they have to be discarded, they can't be just arbitrarily thrown into the trash can, because if you have a cleaning service, they come in and they start cleaning it, you've now violated the boundary line because they can access, controlled unclassified information. So all of these things become part, as I start to say, and you can see, we're talking about things that really can make meeting the standards of control difficult without spending time to understand and analyze. Next. Okay, a self-assessment against 171. So what's my plan? As I said, you have to have a certain amount of documentation. We've talked about the cybersecurity framework. It's a risk-based approach to understanding, and it has the framework core, the profiles, implementations. You must have a continuous monitoring plan, and it's an element of the architecture. The cybersecurity plan in the corner, we're going to talk a lot about that in a second. And down in the bottom right, we have two things called the OODA loop, OODA loop stands for, it's another acronym, observe, orient, decide, and act. It focuses on filtering. And if you think about it, is how do I start looking at something? How do I want to measure something? Okay, so I observe it. I orient myself around how to determine and detect it. I decide on what has to be detected. I detect, I collect, and then I go into the act. Have I met the requirement? And I go and recheck against observing. If I've observed it and I've done it correctly, I'm done. If not, I go through the loop again, again, and again until I've met all the requirements. Next. I had mentioned earlier we would talk about incident reporting and qualification. You can read on the right-hand side, what is an IRP? It's very simple. When you have an incident, you have to report it. But what is critical about this, and what I wanted to spend just a moment on, is understanding the impact to your contracts. If an incident occurs, a vulnerability, a breach, information is passed, some vulnerability is not taken care of in some manner. Again, typically we get a breach, you get malware, you get ransomware, and it has to be reported. Depending upon the severity, and this is where it becomes a individual determination to a degree. You may have to report it not just to, say, your prime, it may have to be reported up to the Department of Defense. And then when you start looking at those types of incidents, the accountability, remember I put back on the risk, accept, transfer, reduce, and if you accept it, and in all cases, no matter what, even if you're reducing it to a stage, there's still some risk, and you're accepting that level of risk. You have to be sure that you're taking care, you have good reporting mechanisms, and you need to report it as quickly and as thoroughly as possible to all affected parties. Okay, just pulling here, what you're looking for is anything the potential to cause chaos by impacting customers, stealing data, intellectual property, damaging brand value. Okay, these things on the right-hand side are just some of the elements that go in. But the incident response plan within the control system of 171 actually calls for you to run a test of your IRP on an annual basis. So you want to have pseudo incidents occur and make sure that the incident response team is put in place, the data is collected, everything is isolated, and the steps necessary to respond and recover are appropriate and adequate, and the mechanisms to get the information out, to isolate and get the information out, are in place and acted upon with routine, with a routineness. Next. So now we're back into completing the 171 related documents. I've been talking an awful lot with the C3POs, again, certified third-party assessing organizations. Okay, these are the people that have been certified by the Cyber AB organization. And Cyber AB is the organization that is authorized by the Department of Defense to determine if people meet the requirements. With all of the C3PO organizations, and within them, the certified assessors, one thing that is extremely consistent, and I mean, whenever I talk to any of these, or I've had other webinars, they hit documentation hard. Go back to what I've said from the beginning. This is all about you stating what you're going to do, doing what you said you were going to do, and having sufficient artifacts and evidence. So if you don't document what you're going to do to meet the requirements of the standards, 171 being the core, okay, then you're not going to be able to pass any kind of assessment. So I gave a short version. So under the heading of documentation, I need a system security plan. From the system security plan, I have policy documentations. And then from the policy documentations, I have process documentations. Some people call them process instructions. Some people call them practice documentation. It doesn't matter. The idea is that there's the policies, and from the policies lead into the processes. I also have to have training records. One of the things is have you conducted false phishing attempts on your organization throughout the year. What kind of threat reports are you reviewing? There's a monthly requirement for doing an analysis of threats related to your sector. And then, of course, your documentation of evidence. Have you, as we said before, have you collected the information? Are you storing it, and is it retrievable? So just taking a moment back to the SSP. If your SSP is not up and running and complete and thorough, you won't go anywhere. Policy documentations. Okay, well, you start saying, well, what do I need? 171 has 14 control families. You need 14 policy documents. Well, from there, where do I get the process documents? Well, if you start going through all of the, excuse me, all of the control families, you'll see there are subcategories to them. And CMMC has released a list of all the necessary, again, practice or process documents needed. The number's 92. There are 92 specific process identified that cover across SP 800-171. So I've got 92, I've got 14 policy documents, I'm now up to 105, and I have an SSP, that's 106. I have to have various training records. Well, how many training things do I have to do? Oh, 6 or 7 per year, per person. I have to have a monthly threat report, and then I have to have all the evidence of things that I've done. You start to see how significant understanding the documentation needs and the status of it, the logging of it, and the retrieval of it becomes. And it is a massive problem. And as I said, my discussions with actual assessors, they seem to consistently scream how important having this documentation, knowing how to access it quickly is with respect to passing a certification assessment. Next. So again, rapid and easy retrieval. It is critical. I really can't state this enough, that if you don't have the documentation, if you can't get to it quickly, when an assessor says, well, I want to see the evidence of your threat reports, and you pull them up, or the evidence of access, privileged access, when was the last time you reviewed who has privileged access, then you're bound to fail. Next. Okay, yes, next. SSP should have the following. Next. Next. Okay. So when you do all of that, and you'll have within your SSP as attachments the policies and the process instrument information, you will indeed ensure that you cover it. Now, the reason I want to mention this is that you can find on the internet examples of templates of an SSP. From the information I have gathered with some of the assessors, some of these SSPs are like 5 pages long, okay? They don't consider that to be sufficient. An unofficial number that has been thrown out is anywhere from 50 to 75 pages long. I've written some SSPs that, based upon the client, it was 200 pages long. It had everything in it, and it was organized so that the assessor could actually come in and look at the SSP, and it was very clear what you were looking at. Well, thank you for bringing up the other one, critical organization information, okay? And it has attached to it your business continuity, your contingency, your incident response, as well as all the restoration plans. So again, SSPs are really the heart of your documentation, and then everything flows from there. Next. Okay, so what data is protected? Next, okay? It's fairly straightforward in your mechanism. I want to briefly get into how we test this, so next. This is the playbook. This is what I was warning you about before. As I said, there's 110 controls within 171. But what has been released is the following. Next. This is the complete requirement. Next. Yes, there are 340 specific objectives that you as an organization seeking certification could be liable against, or to be for evidence. We mentioned earlier your evidence tree. How do we go through? Starting with the core. You build them up from there. You show that this is your mechanism. You've got repeatable, defensible mechanisms of evidence collection and record keeping. Next. And again, the continuous monitoring. The TCPET is another acronym that works pretty good. You task, what am I going to do? What am I going to collect? You collect it, you process it, you undo the exploitation, and then you disseminate it as appropriate. Okay, and again, it's an OODA type loop structure, which can be applied to all of the mechanisms that you have to use to collect. Next. Okay, what do we expect next? So this part of it seems very simple. You search out and schedule a C3PO. You can conduct the assessment. They can be long, 5 days. You get your report. You pass with minor corrective actions, where you have plans of action and milestone correctives, or you fail. Next. So the conclusions. Your documentation is crucial. Technologies used. They will ask you for those types of technologies to defend. Do you know what you're using and why you're using it and how it might be vulnerable? And you must have artifacts. Search all the standards for action words, review, collect, develop. If it says review, you need to have something that allows for the review. If it says collect, it's got to be collected. If it says develop, then it has to be written or developed. I did a search through 171. I came up with 74 specific instances where develop was mentioned. Okay. And if it's a good bet, they're going to use them to look for evidence. Next. Quickly, next. A word about scoring. Okay, according to the cap that the CMMC assessors use, they're going to be using a term called focused. What does that mean? It basically means it's a non-statistical sampling approach. And as they get comfortable, or if they're less comfortable, then they're going to deepen the amount of sampling that they do. And it's based upon certain requirements. There's a maximum score. And if you don't meet the score, they subtract from it. Next. So in conclusion, it really is a matter of understanding. Spend the time on documentation. Understand your collection. You're looking to have an organization that just feels a culture of cybersecurity, anywhere from the president down to the lowest person who could have access to technology and open up the potential for vulnerabilities. And with that, I'll turn it back over to our hosts.
Thank you, Professor McCready. May I just say that that was an extremely enriching presentation. So much to learn and be aware about in this ever-evolving cyber ecosystem. Thank you so much for sharing that. Due to the limitations of time, I will quickly turn to the questions that we have from our participants. So the first question is from Anushka Bhatnagar, who wants to know, if none of the PCs are safe and everything is vulnerable, what would you as an expert recommend?
Well, it's not a matter that the PCs are all vulnerable, but that's where comes back to the person's involvement and a culture. I can't use the word culture enough, because you have to be thinking, I'm vulnerable. Is this the right thing? The simple answer, as we always say, is like when you get an email, don't click on anything. Never click on anything that's in an email. There are other ways to check it, and so rather than just going along and just saying, oh, this looks cool, click, and you're in trouble. Always be suspicious of anything. That's how you start to protect. There are going to be some instances where there's nothing that you can do. Something will get in. We know that. There's no such thing as 100% protection.
Next question, and very relevant, is from Shambhavi Dikshit. How do you see the role of AI evolving in threat detection and prevention?
That's a good one, and it really is evolving right now. AI brings so many things that will automate and utilize the power of a computer and fuzzy logic, large language models and things of this nature to start to assess, again, a risk of it being a vulnerability. They're just multiplying day by day, and it will become a critical part of the detection schemes.
A related question from Poojan Patel: while writes any document, if one uses an AI tool to generate and later on if it violates one of the policies, who is to be blamed, the AI company or the person who used the AI tool?
Yes. It would be difficult to put the blame directly on the AI company. It's your responsibility to ensure that before you use any tool, that it is safe and as vulnerable free as possible, and how you're utilizing it. It should be updated all the time. So I would tend to say is that the responsibility would fall on you as the user as opposed to the producer.
I think that's good for all of us to know, as we are increasingly using AI in all our, enterprises. Next question is from Janvi, who wants to know a little bit more about what do you mean by transferring the risk, and what is the kind of situation in which it is usually done?
Well, transfer risk very quickly is where you would say provide better isolation for some of the systems, such as if you're using the printer as the example, you might transfer the risk to say, I'm going to have a second printer that is solely for non-CUI work. So you don't run into a mixing problem. Okay, that would be a very simple example of transferring risk.
Okay, sir. Next question is from Aditya Kumar. What are some of the potential implications of upcoming developments or government policies and their consequences on privacy?
Again, various contracts will have in it, issues related to the privacy concerns, whether or not they're there. But I think it also ties back to even some of the AI questions is how do we protect? And, I mentioned intellectual property, that's along the same lines as privacy. But a better one would be more towards HIPAA, the U.S. Health Insurance, Act, where, if you fail, the issue is the level of fines. Or another one very quickly is the PCI, which is on the banking industry. The amount of fines, the cost of a fine is per incident. So if a bank gets hacked and there's a 1,000 records stolen, forgive me, I don't think this is the exact number. I think it's $2,500 per incident. So if there's 1,000, it's 2,500 times 1,000. If it's 10,000, it's 2,500 times 10,000. So the impact now puts back on the organization to make sure that they're doing everything possible to protect privacy issues, privacy concerns. Within the DoD arena, if you fail, there's a False Claims Act, which basically says you have not done your job, and then they will fine you up to, I believe it's 3 times the cost of the contract.
Next question is from Satwik Singh, who asks, what is the most common mistake do you see organizations and individuals making when it comes to cybersecurity?
Falling to email scams. There's so many of them. One of the more recent ones that I won't get into the details of it, but it actually happened was to me was one of the organizations I worked for. It's called Business Enterprise Compromise. They attack a mid-level accountant around lunchtime with, "Oh, this is Dr. McCready. I'm in the middle of a meeting. It's very urgent. Please go get 10 gift cards, get the numbers, and then send them out to somebody." The problem was I was in my office 2 doors down. But they come at lunchtime. It's so urgent. And I was a senior, person to a lowly accountant. Who am I going to, question Dr. McCready? So that's probably the biggest one, is that we just fall into this habit of clicking on things for whatever reason. And that's hard, and it will always be there.
Thank you, sir. Next question is from Akshat Mishra, who says that in today's world where every type of report security is being dumped on a single user and it becomes like garbage, he says, by which I think he means that it is ignored. So what do you think is the best way to summarize and familiarize a person if a business wants to report them?
This is, again, education. And, the job of a CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, or anything along that line, okay, they have to understand they're dealing with people. And it's still considered the weakest part of a cyber thing is the people. And to take the approach and just look at it from, I'm going to just go, pick on somebody. You're going to disassociate. You're going to, separate people, and they're going to, have emotions involved. So education, the constant education and bringing it up, it's hard. And I know every year I go through various security, refresher security things to the point where it's just click, 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 because I know the questions. This is where you will get better response, because then the reports aren't treated like garbage. They're not looked at or reviewed. And so doing these reports, these monthly threat reports, these educational parameters need to have time and money spent to make sure that they're, engaging. Otherwise, we just go to sleep.
Thank you, sir. I'm cognizant of the time and we have 1 minute on the clock, but we have so many questions. And if I may just ask you 3 questions, which a number of people have asked, if you can just spare 5 minutes or less.
Certainly.
So a lot of people want to know if you foresee AI outsmarting the best cybersecurity apps and policies. And eventually, do you think it will replace the need for a person actually learning cybersecurity and gaining expertise in it?
Let me hit the first one, and that is we as cybersecurity professionals, we're always going to be behind the 8 ball, as it says, because we're responding, because the hackers are extremely intelligent. The other thing is that as a cybersecurity, I have to be correct 100% of the time, which is not possible. They only have to be correct once. So they can attack me 10 million times and only have to get through once. I have to be correct 10 million times. So that's the difficulty, is we're always in the lag. We're responding to new types of malware, we're responding to new types of phishing schemes, etc. Now, will AI replace the human? I don't think so. I think AI will get to a stage, at least certainly within my lifetime, where its capability will make my reaction time, my catch-up time. As I said, I'm always lagging. I think it will help improve the detection and protection schema much, much better. But I don't think it will ever replace, because the human is always going to be the one who may click, and therefore it will call for some kind of intervention on a human's part.
Thank you, sir. I think a number of questions deal with what are some of the key skills that a cybersecurity professional should have. And if you could recommend certain certifications or programs, I would plug in our USD programs here, both in cybersecurity engineering and CSOC. But in general, what are the skills that you look for? Because you also, I assume, hire or advise hiring for many companies in a cybersecurity professional.
Let me hit the certifications first. Okay, obviously the ones that come up as CISIPs, and then the CompTIA, they have a series of them. There's really a bunch of them. And if you go into that, the CompTIA, it'll give you tracks depending upon what you want to do or be. And like I said, there's easily 20, 30 of them that you could do. And then the interdisciplinary aspects also go into the data analysis aspects, which are another series of certification. So the certification listing is phenomenally long, depending upon what you want to do. The skill set is the kind of the interesting part. It has been discussed and said that a good cybersecurity professional, protection professional, a CISO, is also a decent hacker. Because I have to kind of know what they might do. Another way of doing it is you have to be a little bit distrustful, but in a good sense. Okay. Because I have to start thinking, what might the vulnerability be? If I'm a CISO for an organization, and depending upon what I do, how might somebody get into my system? So I want to start thinking, proactively, but in that type of a sense where I'm thinking of that skill set. And so you're starting to look at, coding capability, logistics, the department, what it does, what its openness might be. And so you're starting to go across that spectrum, and the skill set really becomes your individual, ability to think how and why, how might I do this? Very quickly, it's equivalent to a magician's trick. People look at it and say, oh, how did he do it? And that's not the way you approach to solve a magician's trick. It's how might I do it? It may not be the way the magician did it, but you come up with how you could accomplish the same thing. So that's your approach. That's a skill set, which is the mind. And it's coupled with your knowledge and ability and training in computer information and technology and approaches to system level thinking.
Thank you, sir. And my last question is that for people who are looking to transition into a cybersecurity career, may not have had that kind of training during their undergrad, what is a good place for them to start? Just some basic tips would be very helpful, because I do see that a lot of our attendees have those kind of questions.
Well, it's to attend a master's class just like this. But it's I would say is to actually start doing some research on cyber jobs, the details that when somebody's looking for a cyber professional, what is it the type of thing that they want? And then if you go to any kind of a college, USD certainly, it's to take time to understand what it is, because I've actually seen where people who have undergraduate degrees in criminal justice have the mindset to help them through more towards the CSOL, not necessarily into heavy coding because they didn't do that, but they have the mindset to be a CSOL type of program person. So it really is understanding what, getting through all of the stuff, like I said, all the acronyms, we like to flood that, the information network with, big long terms, XDR, DDR, CDOS, et cetera, but getting away from all of that so that you can understand, translate it into basic single English. So you can then ask intelligent questions would be the way that you would translate from a non-cyber into a cyber-oriented program.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. And I think we'll have to draw close to this class. This field is so vast and so rapidly evolving that we all can understand that a tenure of a masterclass is not enough to address all the questions, which I thank attendees for asking. Professor McCready teaches at USD, so certainly you should look up the program, but we will also attempt to organize more such masterclasses for your benefit.